Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a special webinar tonight. It is Flood Awareness Week in Virginia, so we have quite a few guests joining us tonight from the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, and I'm going to introduce a couple of them to you now before I hand it over to them. We're going to be joined tonight by Catie, who is a planner in the Stormwater Division. Dipmani is the Chief of Watershed Modeling and Analysis Branch. And then we have Emily, who is an engineer tech. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We are going to have a lot of information presented tonight. So I hope you guys enjoy. And Catie, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, good evening. I think, there we go. As Courtney mentioned, I am with the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, and our mission is to create and preserve a sustainable community. So one of the ways we meet this mission is to reduce flood risk to life and property. In honor of Virginia's Flood Awareness Week, county staff is here tonight to share how we can work together to protect our families and the places we love from flooding. Tonight, during this webinar, we'll provide a brief introduction to flooding, including some common terminology and causes. And then recognizing that we all play a role in reducing flood risk, we'll highlight ways that the county is working to reduce flooding and give you tools and resources to mitigate flooding on your property. So first, it's critical to know what type of floods can affect your property and your commute. So you can prepare for what action you need to take when an alert is issued in your area. Three types of flooding occur in the county. You can see them up on the screen. Riverine flooding is often associated with regulated floodplains. And an example of this would be a flooded road at a stream crossing. Urban flooding occurs when rainwater overwhelms the storm drainage systems. This can occur during a hurricane event or even just a thunderstorm. And it often occurs outside of a designated flood zone. And then finally, we have coastal flooding, which impacts certain parts of the county along the Potomac River. And there are different types of flood alerts that the National Weather Service issues up to and during flood events. I encourage you to subscribe to the county's alert system, which includes these weather alerts, and you can find information about the forecast and these alerts at weather.gov. But those are the most common ones you see on the screen. And in exceptional circumstances like the July 8th, 2019 flash floods, the National Weather Service issues a flash flood emergency, which means there's extremely heavy rainfall occurring that could cause a life-threatening situation and catastrophic damage is expected. And when something like that is issued, you shouldn't travel unless you're fleeing an area that's flooding or told to evacuate. And so, in addition to flooding from rain, there are, as I mentioned, portions of the region that are also subject to coastal flooding, particularly in Alexandria. And the National Weather Service issues forecasts for the Potomac River year round, and they have these different flood categories that they help them determine the impact of the flooding. So, if you live adjacent to the Potomac River, you travel through the area. For example, if you're driving along George Washington Memorial Parkway, you should pay attention to these types of alerts. And just to give some context, here's some pictures of flooding throughout the county. Flooding occurs during forecasted major weather events like hurricanes or tropical storms. And these types of events give us usually several days to prepare. You may have lived in the region in 2011 during Tropical Storm Lee, when Fort Belvoir recorded 7 inches of rain in 3 hours. This caused $10 million worth of damages just to the county bridges and roads alone. And then most recently, Tropical Storm Ida affected isolated parts of the county. But flooding can also occur during pop up thunderstorm events that have no notice. And these localized storms can have significant impacts and cause just as much damage as a tropical storm. And to put this in perspective, the July 8th, 2019 storm dropped 3.5 to 5 inches of rain in an hour in certain parts of the county and caused $14 million worth of damages. So kind of dive into some of the issues that cause flooding and look at what are some of the impacts. We'll look at land use changes and climate change. So, taking us back a little bit into our history, post World War II, Northern Virginia experienced rapid urbanization. Farmland and forests became parking lots, houses, and streets. And before the 1970s, there was little to no stormwater management requirements. This means there were few pipes to collect water and carry it to the stream, and no facilities to hold that stormwater and slow the flow to prevent flooding. As a result, there was a lot of stormwater moving very quickly down our systems. And at the time, stormwater was considered a common nuisance, so we wanted to get it away as fast as possible. We buried streams and pipes and filled in the floodplains or the natural buffers next to streams and rivers for development. And in doing so, we didn't just remove the ecological habitat that was there, but we also removed the area for the water to slow down and spread out. And those temporary storage or detention areas that help prevent the downstream flooding. And so in the image, you can see where a portion of Trips Run was channelized, and the trees and the riparian habitat were removed and along the stream banks, and houses were constructed right in the floodplain limits. But since the 1970s, we protected many of our stream valleys and floodplains as open space and parks and developed stringent regulations to avoid new and redevelopment in the floodplain. And during large storm events, pipes can become overwhelmed. Our systems are only designed for the smaller storm events, and water will come out of the system and must flow over land to a downstream point, usually through yards or along roads. Some older houses may sit in these low-lying bowl-shaped areas or sumps where water can't get out of the bowl without flooding the house first. The red hatched area that you can see in the image shows the sump area, and the orange line in the adjacent photo shows the overland flow path of the stormwater. So the stormwater follows the orange line, pools in that red hatched area, and then floods the home before it goes into the street and flows downstream. And this overland flow path is not shown on plats, and it's not always obvious on plans, and may not be known to a resident. And people like to use their backyards, so over time, residents may block the flow path with fences, walls, or planting beds, and even sheds. In the photo, the blue arrow shows the flow path direction, and you can see the combined impact of the narrower stormwater paths where the water would flow from redevelopment of homes into buildings with larger footprints, and then the fences and the sheds that are also blocking the flow path. And the county is working on ways to help residents better understand where these overland flow paths exist. And then finally, this is kind of where climate change comes in. So, climate change will make existing drainage issues worse. Scientists predict an increased frequency in intense storm events, meaning more storms like that July 8th, 2019 event that dropped up to 5 inches of rain in an hour. And in fact, the region has seen multiple storms of equivalent intensity since then. So, climate change isn't necessarily causing the problem, but it will definitely make the situation worse. And the county has started planning for this new reality with increased focus on resiliency. So, the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services is currently managing dozens of active flood mitigation projects that range in size from floodproofing measures on individual residential lots to neighborhood scale stormwater improvements. And now, Emily Street with the Maintenance and Stormwater Management Division will share ways her group helps mitigate flooding.
Thank you, Katie. So yes, my name is Emily Street. I'm one of the inspectors with Maintenance and Stormwater. And so what I'd like to share with you is the type of infrastructure that we have and the data, that we can share with you on what we maintain. So if we'll go, Katie, if we'll go to the next slide. So in Fairfax County as a whole, the systems can be broken into different entities that maintain them. So it's not just Fairfax County Maintenance and Stormwater that has stormwater infrastructure. Virginia Department of Transportation, private entities like townhouse communities, or commercial lots. They can maintain their own infrastructure. But for what maintenance and stormwater, what we have in our inventory, you can see the data there, 1,400 miles of pipe, 66,000 plus stormwater structures. And that is anything from a curb inlet that you would see in a parking lot or a yard inlet, grade inlet that, residents have in a neighborhood, manholes that we use to allow infrastructure to make 90-degree turns, or for maintenance clean out purposes. 200 miles of man-made channels. So that was done during development where we have concrete channels in some of the more urbanized areas of the county, and 2,500 ponds. And that's not the kind where, we've got the goldfish, not those kinds of ponds where you go fishing. These are detention and retention ponds. So the detention ponds are another term for that is a dry pond where it's only going to hold water for a certain amount of time. Um, and the engineering standards, we only want to see water in those ponds for about 72 hours. And then the wet ponds, they are engineered to hold water for an extended period of time, and then they have a spillway. So if we were to get a rain event, those wet ponds have a spillway to not flood, but to keep the water level at a certain point. So as I mentioned, these storm drains can be located anywhere and everywhere. We've got them in residential areas and single family homes, townhouse communities. They can be on commercial and industrial, even on, school and religious sites. And then, like I said, they're in the right of ways and the state right of ways that VDOT shares the responsibility for that. One thing that we get a lot of questions about are driveway culverts. They can be in the right of way that VDOT maintains, but majority of the times those end up being private responsibility for property owners. So it kind of goes hand in hand. I do recommend if you have questions about your driveway culverts to contact VDOT, and they would be able to help best direct you whether they could assist with it or if they would say that it's the property owner's responsibility to maintain. So we'll go to the next slide. So for maintenance and stormwater, with all that infrastructure that we have to make sure that we're proactive and ensuring that that infrastructure functions as it was intended. So we perform a walking survey where we have several questions that and we literally walk from structure to structure within our easements to catch anything that's visual to the eye on the surface. So we're looking at the manholes to make sure that they're not buried from, for over the years, those structures can get buried quite easily. We want to check for erosion around infrastructure. We also have a pole camera that has literally a camera that's attached to a pole, and we can insert it down into any infrastructure. And as you can see there, we catch some pretty unique finds where it's separated joints, severe blockages. And then the CCTV camera, which is the closed caption TV, it's a little rover that has a nice camera on it. and it journeys through the pipe system, and we literally inspect each joint to ensure, that the separations aren't getting out of hand. We check for cracks. Each pipe system gets a rating based off of the CCT camera program that we have. So we'll go to the next slide here. So with being proactive, it allows us to reinvest in our infrastructure with the things that we identify while inspecting, whether it's on the surface or sending our cameras through the system. It helps us to reinvest so that we can repair, renew, and replace. And so these pictures really help show the different kinds of projects that we're able to do. On the repair photos, you'll see this is a liner project getting ready to help allow us to rejuvenate the pipe system. It's a very less invasive project that that technology has really opened up ways for us to improve the life and integrity of our pipe systems by um, giving it that extra life to be able to survive another 25 to 30 years. On the renew, you'll also see that's also part of the liner project, that they insert the sleeve and then an infrared technology that they have that blows up the liner, and it improves the inner lining of the system. And then when there's opportunities where we do have to take that next step to really repair infrastructure, we have to do a whole replacement. So you'll see there is where we have to do the digging to repair or totally replace our stormwater infrastructure. And for for our department, we have the opportunity to evaluate it for whether it's going to be an in-house repair that our heavy construction crew is able to make the repair, or we have contracted out. So we go through that evaluation process to determine whether it would be an in-house repair or contracted out. So if we don't proactively inspect our system and if we don't reinvest, unfortunately, these photos these are the results, and when we don't be proactive and reinvest. So you can see the different types of misfortunes that happen because of whether there's a blockage. Um, you'll see that there's erosion and we get infrastructure failure. There's some sinkholes, and then old pipe systems eventually corrode. That one photo at the top, that's an old corrugated metal pipe that looks like just it wasn't able to make it another, several years. So those pipe systems can only survive, maybe 25 to 30 years. Some can be longer, but the corrugated metal pipe unfortunately doesn't last as long as the concrete pipes do. And then you can see here that we had some house flooding that occurred where water entered the house, and then some potholes. A lot of times, VDOT probably sees those more often than we do for our infrastructure, but in our parking lots where we have easements and infrastructure and residential areas, that could be something that could happen if we don't take care of our system, as we see here. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. So how can you help us when it comes to our stormwater infrastructure? Um, as you can see on the top, we have our call center information where we welcome the community to reach out to us, whether it's for questions or alerting us to an issue that you were to see regarding to stormwater. Um, so one half of our program is proactive, but the other half, the program that I work in specifically as an inspector, is the reactive side, where we have community members reach out to us, and myself and I have two other colleagues that are inspectors, and we respond to our service requests that get called in to our call center. We have a very handy QR code that you can see here. Actually checked it out today. It does work. It will take you straight to our stormwater site where you can log in an online form to submit a service request. And either myself, my colleagues, we will definitely be able to help you out if you were to have any questions or concerns. So just a few things that I have noted on here: the inspector's mission, providing excellent customer service along with educating community members about stormwater management. So for myself and my colleagues, together we probably have over 30 years of stormwater experience, especially dealing with the customer service side of stormwater. And so we call ourselves the first responders because in our agency, we are able to meet with the community first about the concerns that are brought to our attention. So, for instance, if I get a service request for a sinkhole by yard inlet on private property, I get to go out and be that first person to meet with the property owner and to discuss our levels of service and so forth. And so we are broken into magisterial districts. There are 9 of those in the county. I myself, I have 3 of those 9: Drainsville, Hunter Mill, and Sully. And then my coworkers have the other districts. Um, so regarding our process, we want to be very respectful of the community's time when service requests are called in. So during just the regular seasons of the year, we like to be able to respond to our community members within 3 to 5 business days. And then let's say we had a flooding event. We do tend to have to stretch that out based off of the amount of calls that we get. So it could be like 7 to 10 business days. Just depends on how many calls we have gotten. And so normally for these types of service requests, we investigate, we come to the site, put our eyes on it, take photos. We want to be able to get, I always say pictures are worth 1,000 words. So we always like to document the issue or the concern so that we're able to document it and to be able to use that in the future. If another issue were to come up on that same site, we have photos from, could be 5 years ago or even 10 years ago, that really can tell a story if you have a certain property that may have had several service requests called in. It may give us a hint that something's really going on, and we should probably put the CCTV camera down into the pipe system to ensure that everything's working as it should down there. We have to perform research, pull grading plans, pull development plans, um, and then if necessary, we create a work order or we refer a community member to the next best step, whether we have to send you to one of our stormwater partners, whether it's our sister agency, Stormwater Planning, or it could be an external agency like the Virginia Department of Transportation or some of the utility companies like Fairfax Water or Dominion or anything like that. So on the next slide, I'd like to talk about how you can help yourself as a property owner. So let's talk about some stormwater easements. And something I'd like to read that is actually taken from our county's website. What exactly is an easement? So an easement is a right granted from a property owner to another for a specific use of a portion of the owner's land. So what I like to call it sometimes is basically stormwater having right of way on private property. A lot of times a property owner will say, oh, the county has its own property on mine. But in reality, what it is that that stormwater easement actually overlays on top of private property. So it's still your property, but it has a stormwater easement on it that gives us the right to perform maintenance to our stormwater asset. It's kind of like utility companies like Dominion or the communication companies. They have their own easements so that they can have the right to access an area of the property to perform maintenance on their utility. So one one new thing that the county has recently added is JADE. As you can see right there, Fairfax County JADE. It's a wonderful map system that the community has access to help identify who maintains what in the county. There are so many different assets and where they're located. This new mapping system will allow you to input whatever address you have, whether you're looking up your own property. You would put in that address and you can select whether it's a stormwater system that you're trying to identify responsibility of, or it could be a walkway or a sidewalk. And so, yeah, as we can see here on the top right hand corner, it's very simple. You would type in any address, whether um, I'm not sure if if we're gonna have a exact example right now, but we could put in like 12,000 Government Center Parkway. Yes, that's perfect. And what we can do is highlight um, on that particular parcel, which is the actual government center. It's the main county government center building, and we have infrastructure there that we can show showcase. But in the interim, um, it's a very easy tool to help identify assets to see whether it's maintained by the county or maintained by VDOT, um, and so forth. So the county maintains stormwater infrastructure within the easement to allow for proper function. But we do rely on property owners also to be responsible for the various items noted below. So we do ask that routine ground maintenance. We are unable to go to each structure within our easement to mow or to, rake leaves and so forth. So we really do rely on property owners to perform routine ground maintenance. Um, we do ask that trees and shrubs and other growth within easements, remains limited. So we understand that some easements will have natural growth of trees and therefore and such, but as far as new landscaping, trees do not mix well in our easements, especially that have pipe systems underneath, because those tree roots are extremely strong and they can really infiltrate through our stormwater joints. And then just another thing to note, that any landscaping done in an easement where we have to perform work can be subject to removal. So I always preface to property owners to make sure that you're landscaping it in an area where you know that there's not an easement, whether it's a stormwater or a sanitary easement, because wastewater also has, buried infrastructure within their easements as well. And then again, driveways and their associated culverts and bridges, those are privately maintained by property owners. So you always want to make sure that your driveway culvert is free of debris, so that during a storm event, um, it can function as it was intended to do. Fences, we get a lot of questions about fences. While we do allow them in our drainage easements, we do want to make sure, and property owners need to make sure that they're not blocking the surface flow. So even just for a normal event where it's just a regular event that's not of any severity or anything, you want to make sure that you have several inches at the bottom of your fence. Those security stockade fences. They do great to, protect property owners, from making sure that nobody's, you have your privacy. I guess that's what they're called, privacy fences for a reason. But they can also be a nuisance with stormwater because they really hold that stormwater on the property. Um, and then as well, as Catie mentioned, overland relief. That is a real big thing to keep in mind is you may not have a shed or landscaping in the way, but if you um, fence off your property to a point where the overland relief path is blocked, that can really self-inflict a property to cause water to back up, and we don't want any access points of the house to be susceptible to flooding based off of the water not being able to get off the property by a fence blocking it. And then last but not least is how can we work together? Not just the county and the community, which we do that, but we want neighbors to work together. And so as you can see in the photos here, these are three specific cases where a neighbor has built or filled in the property boundary to an extent where what we would call the upstream runoff. So properties that are at a higher elevation, water is intended to flow obviously down to the lower properties. But if we have the lower property owners on the downstream side building retaining walls around the property boundary or creating like an earthen dam, um, that really causes neighboring properties to flood or to hold water for an extended period of time. So in the state of Virginia, the water is considered a common enemy, meaning that each parcel owner is required and responsible to receive runoff from higher elevation properties and to allow that water to flow in its intended path. So an earthen dam, a retaining wall, or creating infrastructure around a stormwater inlet that really impedes the functionality of it. We really want to make sure that we're looking out for those. A lot of times they're not done on purpose or maliciously. So that's why we hope presentations like this can help property owners to be of an understanding and to be alert about how their property could maybe impact a neighboring property. So I have noted here in the county's zoning ordinance, um, what we do is we can help protect property owners by using this zoning code to require a certain property owner to remove a retaining wall, for example. So like in that middle picture there, we wanted to make sure that the cinder block wall was removed. So that way the yard inlet noted there could function as it was intended to. So with that being said, we are going to have a flooding video play for you.
From nuisance to disaster, flooding is one of Fairfax County's most common hazards. Low-lying areas of the county are the most vulnerable to flooding, but all residents should be prepared for a flood. Sign up for Fairfax Alerts and stay on top of any situation with up-to-the-minute information on severe weather, informing you of a flood watch or flood warning. A flood watch means there is a possibility of flooding or flash flooding in your area. A flood warning means a flood is occurring or will soon. If advised to evacuate, do so immediately. Follow Fairfax Alerts and local media and keep aware of the evolving situation. If you see floodwaters rising, move to higher ground immediately. Stay away from floodwaters and related hazards like downed power lines. Do not drive through flooded roads. Even if the water appears shallow, turn around, don't drown. Return home only when local officials say it's safe, even if floodwaters have receded. Get rid of anything that has been wet for more than 48 hours. These items will remain a source of harmful mold growth. Finally, when the dust has settled, take a look at your response. What will you do differently if there is a next time? Go to the Department of Emergency Management and Security's webpage for more ways to be ready for common local hazards, and breathe easier the next time it storms.
Okay. Hi everyone. Good evening. My name is Dipmani Kumar, and with that background on some of the initiatives that the county is taking to reduce flood hazards, and also the ongoing work that the maintenance division does, let me talk a little bit about how you can understand your flood risk a little better and also prepare, um, be prepared, and point you to several resources that you can use to assist you in that. So the first step is obviously to understand your property's flood risk, and we'll talk about these myths that FEMA wants to dispel. And one of them is that, well, I don't live in a flood zone, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But there are several places you can look up the flood risk. We have a very useful tool called the Fairfax County Floodplain Viewer that allows you to identify whether you're in a major floodplain. And this work is ongoing. The county does not have its minor floodplains or completely mapped, but we are embarking on that. We have about 800 miles of streams that have regulated floodplains. I'd say about 500, maybe 600 miles of that has the floodplain mapped on it. A lot of the minor floodplains are not mapped, but we've started that process. The state also has the Virginia flood risk information system, which primarily provides information on the FEMA designated floodplains, which I'll talk about as well. So that's something to keep in mind, that the county regulates, the county's regulatory floodplain extends well above or well upstream of where you'll find information on floodplains either from the state or FEMA. So I'll talk about this in a little more detail, but in my role at the county, I act as the National Flood Insurance Program Coordinator. And any community that participates in the NFIP, FEMA designates these special flood hazard areas, SFHAs, and they consider the risk in these areas to be significant enough that if you have a federally backed mortgage, you're required to purchase flood insurance. And so these flood insurance rate maps are what are regarded as the official community maps that depict the extent of these SFHAs, as they're referred to. And you can see that over here on the left. The green area is a special flood hazard area, where if there's a structure in that and the structure has a federally backed mortgage, you'll be required to purchase flood insurance. So I talked about these myths, right? So the first one is that I don't live in a flood zone. So the fact is that everyone lives in a flood zone, and FEMA has this kind of byline that they use, and you see I see it more and more often on some of the literature. Where it can rain, it can flood. So that's something that we all need to recognize. And just a little bit of water, as you can see here, just a few inches can cause tens of thousands of dollars in damage. Right. So the other myth is that your homeowner's policy covers flooding, but in fact it doesn't. I was just reading recently that when Maria went through Puerto Rico, a lot of people thought that their, what they considered hurricane coverage, right, which was wind damage, covered any impacts from hurricanes. But of course, uh, the flooding wasn't covered, and less than 10% of the residents who were impacted by Maria actually had flood insurance. And then another myth is that the federal government will declare a disaster if a flood happens. And that is true, but there are several caveats there. So if you have these, Catie mentioned these local microbursts that occur. Well, something like that is not going to result in a presidential federal disaster declaration. And even if one is declared, you have to qualify, and it's typically a loan that must be repaid with interest. So another example is Harvey. When Harvey impacted Houston, the payouts, they estimated the average payouts for residents who had flood insurance, and that was about $100,000 plus, while the residents who did not, it was just a few $1,000s, $6,000 or $7,000. So that's another myth, that presidential disasters will cover your losses if you don't have flood insurance. So the National Flood Insurance Program, right? So this, what happened, I guess, mainly in the 50s, there were private insurers, and because of the extent of claims, that all moved out of these areas that were prone to flooding. So the federal government, and this was actually precipitated by a major event, Hurricane Betsy in I think it was 1965, that really caused this National Flood Insurance Program to be created by Congress in 1968. And it provides flood insurance to any homeowner, renter, or business owner. And maybe this is another myth, but that we should dispel as well, that anyone can purchase flood insurance. You don't need to have a structure in a special flood hazard area, or a floodplain designated by FEMA. So depending on your perception of risk, you may choose to purchase flood insurance. It is administered by FEMA, and it's available to any one of the participating. There are over 22,000 of them in the country. So this flood insurance is available, underwritten by FEMA. So it is important to understand what is covered. There are two types of coverages. There's the building insurance, and then the contents insurance. And the limits are $250,000 on the building and $100,000 on the personal, on the contents insurance. And there are limitations, and the best thing to do really is if you are interested in obtaining flood insurance, is to talk to your insurance broker, and almost all of them will actually provide you with details on what exactly is covered, and whether you should get both building and contents, or just the building insurance. And it's also very important when you're considering purchasing flood insurance to understand what's not covered, and you'll get details on that as well. The one thing that's really important to understand is what, because when you're outside a designated, a FEMA designated special flood hazard area, typically you're worried about your basement, because that's where, not that that's always the case, but it is very important to understand the limitations of the basement coverage. So this next slide actually provides a little bit of detail on that. So the building coverage as part of the building coverage, you actually there's a fair bit of coverage for central air conditioners, furnaces, sump pumps, and so on, that are typically located in the basement. So that's already covered. That the contents coverage, if you choose to get that, covers some additional like washers and dryers and so on in the basement. But what's not covered is pretty much what you'd consider a finished basement. So it's really important to understand the limitations of basement coverage when you get this. So as I mentioned, you should talk to your insurance agent about NFIP, because almost everything, there is some private insurance, but almost everything is underwritten by FEMA under the NFIP. But they have this program called Write Your Own policy, which is administered by your whoever your homeowner's insurance is through. There is also NFIP Direct, where you actually contract directly or get a policy directly from FEMA. But typically, at least what I've seen, is that NFIP Direct is when it's a repetitive loss property and FEMA kind of takes over, because once you get beyond a certain number of claims, the premiums actually start to rise a lot. And that's what I've seen, that they actually take it over under NFIP Direct. So moving on to the next slide. So as I said, you have so there is a little bit of private insurance. FEMA itself is actually moving towards not underwriting everything. They've also tapped into the reinsurance market, because as you may have heard, after Katrina impacted New Orleans, the NFIP program itself is pretty heavily in debt. I think it's about $20 billion. So FEMA has a number of programs. One of them is this Risk Rating 2.0 that I'll talk about in a little bit. But they're also tapping into this private reinsurance market. There's also a little bit of private flood insurance available in the U.S. It's approximately 10% of the total market, and NFIP doesn't consider it as a competitor, because as I said, right in the beginning, it was actually all private insurers, and they moved out, and the federal government took that over through NFIP, and now you're seeing a little bit of activity, even though, again, I was reading very recently that in Florida, where you have a lot more private insurers, they are experiencing very heavy losses. So, we'll see how that goes. Anyway, so Risk Rating 2.0. The basic reason that FEMA is moving or has moved, actually, as you can see the dates here, they started this in October 2021 with new policies, and then April 2022 last year, all existing policies were renewing under this new rating system. And so by this April 23, or after April 1st, 23, everything will be rated under Risk Rating 2.0. And the impetus for all of this is really that the need to move to market rates. As I said, they're heavily in debt right now. Of course, it's on, Congress has been forgiving some of that debt, and I don't think that program will ever be discontinued, because there really isn't any alternative. But what they want to do is try and rate policies based on their actual risk. I mean, what their studies had shown is that a lot of the burden of the payouts was actually being taken. The people at lower risk were actually paying more than the people who were at higher risk. So that's the basic. And that graphic that you see at the bottom here, you can see, and this is average, right, through their analysis of existing policies and how they would rate under risk rating 2.0. The vast majority should see very minimal increases, and some will see decreases, and of course some will see increases. What I've seen in the county is, and we'll look at a snapshot of the NFIP and the associated CRS program that I'll talk about in just a minute, is what we refer to as preferred risk policies, which is people outside FEMA designated floodplains who have had no claims. Those were called preferred risk policies. Those are no longer available. And they were typically bundled as contents and building. So what we've seen, unfortunately, and actually FEMA is seeing this a little bit nationwide, is that because risk rating 2.0 is new, and people are suddenly finding that even if it's a minimal increase, they don't realize that there are other discounts that are going to come into play, and eventually their increase in the premium won't be very high. We're actually seeing a reduction in which is very unfortunate, in the number of policies in the county. But so that's one thing. An underlying goal in all of this is to move towards full risk rates based on what they call statutory glide paths, which is they want to make sure that you don't get a very large increase, and those are capped by Congress, I think, at 18% per year. So again, some people will see decreases, some people will see small increases, and eventually everything will be rated under risk rating 2.0. And their feeling is that it's a more equitable system, which and they've done a lot of, they've been preparing for a long time for this, and I think it will take some time to be accepted by the community, and hopefully we'll move back to getting people who really should have flood insurance, continuing to get those policies. So one other thing that I did want to talk about, that I also, in my role, act as the alternate community rating system coordinator, is this voluntary community rating system. So, and essentially what this is it's an incentive by FEMA to NFIP communities to provide or do certain activities, which includes a higher level of floodplain management, and they get rated. And the ratings go from you start at a class. When you enter the program, you start at class 9. Actually, I forget whether it's class 10 or 9, but and then as you improve, you go down in the class. So right now we're at a class 6 level, and that gives us a 20% discount. And one really nice thing about risk rating 2.0 is that discount, the 20% discount, is irrespective of whether you're in a FEMA floodplain or not. So if you purchase flood insurance outside, you still get the 20% discount. That used to be capped at 10%. So it's an additional 10% for, and that's actually what we haven't, we've tried to convey this to people who are opting not to continue their insurance because the preferred risk policies are no longer available, that you are going to get an additional discount beyond what you were getting before. So the CRS program, and we're continuing to try and achieve, so we need to, we have an annual recertification, and then every 5 years, we do what is referred to as a cycle verification, which is an extensive documentation of everything we're doing. And then ISO, which is FEMA's contractor, rates us again under the their rating system to see whether we continue to maintain that class or possibly improve. So what we're trying to do, we're coming up for a renewal next year, so we'll go through a verification cycle next year. We're trying to see whether we can achieve one class improvement, which will give us another 5% discount in the flood insurance policies. So here's just some really a quick snapshot of the NFIP and CRS in the county. So we entered the NFIP back in 1970. The county had actually been very proactive. They had done a lot of floodplain mapping. So we had these flood hazard boundary maps that were used, and the official flood insurance rate maps, the first ones were only issued in 1990. And then they were essentially digitized in 2010. And right now we're going through, FEMA's done extensive new studies, and we expect to get new maps probably sometime next year. So that'll be an update. So the policies in force from December 2022 are about 5,000. At the peak, we were at over 6,000 policies. As I said, unfortunately, with this new risk rating 2.0, people feel that, well, I'm out of a flood zone. I had this preferred risk policy. Now the premiums are going up a little bit, or that's what they think. They've unfortunately seen a decrease there. So you could see, this is kind of an interesting statistic. The total claims since the inception of the program have only been just over 1,300 claims with that total payout you see there. So you could see that the premiums being paid right now, so that averages to about $500 per policy, is only about 7 years worth of premiums approximately, if you look at it that way. And meanwhile, we've been in this program for well over 50 years now. And then that's the summary on the right on the CRS. You had just to go back to this, is that we are a Class 6. The last verification was in 20. We're due for one next year, and we'll try and get to a Class 5 with an additional 5% discount. So the floodplain viewer is a great tool to look at, to identify whether you are in fact in either a FEMA floodplain or a county map floodplain. And then there's also additional information on that page about the NFIP and other information in building in and around floodplains and so on. And then you also have DEMS, the Department of Emergency Management, and I forget. I know they just changed their name. So you have that information ready, Fairfax flooding information there as well. In addition to that, we have really useful information on how to prepare for flood events and minimize your losses at floodsmart.gov, and that link you see up there. And they're very useful. There's very useful information on this page on how to minimize your flood losses, including elevating your utilities, anchoring them, waterproofing your basement, clearing debris from gutters, and so on. And then additional resources on protecting your home. So some key takeaways going back to what Catie discussed and Emily discussed, that flooding can occur during any storm event. Fairfax County is taking several proactive steps to mitigate flooding. You should always know your flood risk, and then very importantly, keep flow paths open, which is that overland relief that Emily talked about. And then based on your perception of what your risk is, determine whether you should purchase flood insurance. And then always, be prepared, be informed. And this last slide here that was also discussed in the video is to always have an emergency plan, have an emergency kit, and subscribe to Fairfax alerts, and specific groups under there, like River Watch alerts is for communities in Bellevue and Huntington that are at a slightly higher risk of flooding. So alerts specific to those areas are issued through River Watch. Then, of course, there are the official accounts, and then there's also wireless emergency alerts, which is really becoming the standard for any kind of emergency notification to a specific area. And there's also the NOAA weather radio. So I think that was it.
Thank you guys. You guys did amazing. We do have a couple questions that did come in. So one of them, can renters get flood insurance to cover their contents?
I want to say yes, but maybe I do need, if we could get some contact information, I'll make sure I confirm that.
We can absolutely do that. And then the second one, how do we report concerns if we're concerned like about a neighbor?
So what I would recommend, if it's a drainage related concern for a neighboring property, please feel free to contact us at our call center. Not sure if you took down that information, but it's 703-877-2800, or contact MSMD at fairfaxcounty.gov. There's also that QR code to be able to fill out the online report form. But yes, contact us, provide us the details of what you believe is going on. An inspector will come out, contact you, will assess, evaluate, and provide recommendations, or will help coordinate the situation with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. This was so informative. And I know every time I hear you guys speak, I definitely learn something new. So whether the folks that are listening are hearing this for the first time, or if you joined us live, we really appreciate you taking the time to learn about flooding and how you can protect not only yourself, but you can always contribute to your community. And I hope you guys enjoyed the flooding video. This was definitely the preview. You guys got the sneak preview of our brand new hazard video for our flooding page. So you can expect to see that up this week. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Remember, it is still Flood Awareness Week. We're still posting a lot of great information every day. And we do have one last webinar. It's a lunch and learn on Friday at noontime. So we look forward to having you guys join us, and have a great night.